Hello, and welcome to Stories of Your Success Behind the Scenes with Blueprint 1543. My name is Rebecca Dorsey, and I am the co founder and vice president of Blueprint 1543. At Blueprint, our mission is to support the development of integrated people, integrated churches, and integrated inquiry to help people ask and answer some of life's biggest questions using the tools of the sciences and the Christian faith. The goal of this podcast, Secrets of Your Success Behind the Scenes with Blueprint, is to step behind the scenes into the making of scholarly success and hear some stories from people we have worked with as they do their integrated thing. Here with me today is longtime colleague and dear friend, Dr. Ian Church. Ian, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. This is wonderful. Thanks, Rebecca.
Now, Ian, before we launch into how we met, can you just help us understand what has contributed to the doctor in front of your name? What do you do and what is your background, as they say?
Yeah, so I'm an associate professor of philosophy at Hillsdale College. Started working here in 2016. And I'm also the director of the Arte Research Center for Philosophy, Science, and Society. And so I've been working with you and Justin for over a decade now in various capacities. And so, yeah, it's been really good to stay in touch and keep working together.
It is amazing how time literally flies,
Yeah.
especially when you're having fun, because we have known each other since 2012.
Yeah.
Does that sound right to you?
Yeah.
2012, it is now 2024. That's some significant life that has happened there. And one of the things that I don't know if I've ever told you, did you know that you have the actual voice of my father?
Yes, you told me that before.
Which is weird
Yes.
because you and I are the same age, so you can't be my father, but
Right.
you have the same voice as my actual father to the point where if you called me and my dad called me, I may actually have a difficult time telling who is who. And there's nobody else in the world I've encountered that has a similar tone to my father. And it's the cadence, it's the tone, it's word choice sometimes even. There is just some pretty shocking similarities there.
That's so
So,
funny.
you share a lot in my family line that you just might not really know the depths of. But what are some of the fun memories that you maybe have from our early days of working together that I might not know?
Well, let's see. So I remember, I think it was one of the very first days that we met. It was in Southern California. And I remember you apologized for the weather, how bad the weather's been. And I think, how I'm remembering this is that it was because there was like a cloud in the sky. And I had just moved from Scotland, where you can go, a month without seeing the sun. And so did not dawn on me that the weather had been poor in Southern California, and it made me realize that I'm not in Kansas anymore, so to speak.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm in a new spot now.
yeah,
That's actually kind of funny. So I was apologizing. We were having bad weather as if I was a local
yep,
Angelino. I lived in Los Angeles for 12 years and really loved most of it. But when I moved there, I remember just absolutely mocking the Angelinos for their feelings about the weather
oh
and
yeah,
storm watch and how storm watch was this big thing. And I'm like, oh, there's a cloud in the sky and this isn't even drizzle. I
yeah,
grew up in Oregon on the coast of Oregon, so rain was a thing and it was barely a drizzle, and the news was telling people to stay home because storm watch. And it sounds like I very quickly actually adapted to becoming that person. So that's funny. Thank you for that humility.
yeah,
Thank you
yeah.
for bathing me in that humility, dousing me in it. Since we did in fact meet on the science of intellectual humility, that's very fitting. Uh,
Yes, that's right.
that was our humble and early beginning. Now, some 12 plus years later, you're doing some pretty fun and interesting things. To start us off, can you just rattle off what comes to mind? What are some of the things that people are asking you to do in the world these days?
Yeah, so I've being asked to help organize some sections for the American Philosophical Association, their 2025 Central Division meeting. They're moving it all online. People have seen some of the events that we've been organized and have been really impressed with it. And so they want to keep doing that in other sort of broad national venues, and so organizing some sections within that conference and so on and so forth has been part of that. Being asked to evaluate grant proposals, being asked to write new grants. All these things are sort of a part of my daily interactions. That being asked to write articles, all this stuff, it's the dizzying heights of academia.
The dizzying heights of academia, getting asked to do more work, the
Yep.
kind of work that comes with deadlines that are very real, but some really big, exciting things. Can you tell me a little bit about what are some of the grants, some of the projects that you have been working on recently?
Yeah, so the big project we're finishing up now, it's going to be ending at the end of August, is the Launching Experimental Philosophy of Religion project. And so that project aims to take the tools and resources of psychology and cognitive science and bring them to bear on some seminal issues within philosophy of religion. And so experimental philosophy has been a growing field within philosophy within the last 20 some odd years, though I think the answer is more complicated than that. But where this project in particular is trying to extend that research into philosophy of religion in particular.
Okay. So we met because you were hired onto a grant, the Science of Intellectual Humility. And you just mentioned a grant. I think there's been a few other things in between there. Do
Yeah.
you know how much total funding have you received to date in the form of grants?
I think it's approaching 3 million in funding so far. Yeah.
Now, you did the thing where you looked up, for those who couldn't see you, you looked up into the side like you were in deep thought. But is that a number that you actually have memorized and fully in your pocket to pull out anytime you need it? Because that's
Well,
pretty
I was just sort of going
$3
through the past couple
million.
grants. I was trying to do some mental addition, and apparently I do mental addition up there.
We all do. We all do mental addition up to the side. So $3 million,
Yeah.
and you are a philosopher.
Yes.
When you started out, let's just say in grad school, velocirapting training happening all around you, did you imagine that you would be sitting here saying, yeah, I need to do a little mental math here, but I think it's coming in around $3 million of grant work that I've done in my career so far?
No, that really wasn't much something I was expecting to do. And at that point, I was all philosophers know, right? They should know when they're going to grad school just how utterly and profoundly abysmal the higher ed job market is.
Mhm.
Right. So if you're a philosopher undergrad and majoring in philosophy, the job market is very, very good. But if your goal is to work as an academic, it's an insane gamble, right? The job market is profoundly bad. And so at that point, I was gearing up to do absolutely anything that could come my way in terms of academic employment. And to be at a place where I'm feeling very supported, and being able to teach really, really good, driven, almost annoyingly driven students, it's a tremendous blessing.
Annoyingly driven
Oh
students.
yeah, they need to relax.
Now, that's funny coming from your mouth.
Yeah, right. No,
Telling
I
people
know.
that they need to relax when I've heard some stories about things that you needed to do to relax in
Yes.
interviews and such. If you think back to the young velociraptor with his leather satchel strapped over his shoulder,
Yep.
walking to work, first day in your postdoc, what are some of the things that you thought you might be working on when you started as a philosophy professional?
Well, I mean, I was still trying to get my head around what was going to be needed from me. I mean, everything was clear enough, but I didn't really understand what it was going to look like in practice. Right. So I remember still sort of
Clear, but I
wondering.
didn't understand. Yeah, I think
Yeah,
that's
right.
the definition of not being clear.
Well, it's just it's I understood academically, in terms of
Yeah.
the language, but in terms of what it's going to look like on the ground. I had several layers of cognitive dissonance, right? So I remember I almost didn't apply to the job, right?
Sure.
Because I thought I just don't know if that's going to be something that they'd be interested in me for. But I had a good friend who was working in Southern California. He said, "Hey, you should apply. It'd be great to be in the same city." Little did I know that being in the same town as someone, like being in LA at the same time as someone else, means almost nothing, because it can still take you hours and hours to go and see that person.
Yep.
But so I thought, okay, fine. I mean, I told him I'd apply, so I'll apply. And instead of trying to like carefully, you know, uh, craft my application to try to sort of sniff out what you're exactly looking for, I just had a come as you are moment. I'm just going to sort of be exactly who I am, and what my interests are. And lo and behold, I got an interview. And so, but again, I had several layers of cognitive dissonance, because I saw the advertisement, and here was a position in a graduate school of psychology at a seminary, and they're wanting to hire a philosopher. And I just really didn't understand, like, how all these things were going to fit together. And that philosopher was meant to provide intellectual leadership to a $5.4 million grant. Well, I'm barely comfortable with submitting my doctoral thesis at that point, and still struggling to look at it anymore, because I'm worried I'm going to find more typos. And so, how could I feel confident enough to provide intellectual leadership to something that big and important? And so I had a lot of sort of anxiety, a lot of concern about saying, am I going to be able to do this? Am I going to be good enough, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, anxiety around intellectual leadership on an intellectual humility project.
Yeah.
Do you feel like that was a trick question at any point? Like, we want you to provide intellectual leadership on the science of intellectual humility.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. Well, I like to, it's one of my favorite jokes is to tell people I'm a world expert on intellectual humility.
I see what you did there.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
see that. That's
yeah.
really nice.
Mhm.
Now, what are some things, if you take us behind the scenes, because that is the name of the conversation, what are some things that helped you go from anxious, stressed out, unclear what this looks like on the ground practically, to the place that you are today?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's really a huge factor in that transition was, and I'm not just being sappy or anything, but the kindness of you and Justin, right? I was so worried. I was so worried about whether or not I was going to be good enough. And my family and I just moved out to LA, and I was like, oh man, what if I'm not cut out for this? And, I have to move back to Indiana, and so on and so forth. And I was just so worried. But, very early on, you and Justin made it very clear that you guys, I'm not just sort of a tool in the machine that you guys are turning the crank on, but that you guys were invested in me as a person. And that I wasn't even just a postdoc on this project, but again, you were investing in me as a person and in terms of my career. And I can't tell you just how much that meant to me. And I come from several generations of academics, and I was telling my mom about you guys, and she like sort of was completely dumbfounded, because that's unheard of in higher education, to have your employers that invested in postdocs, which come and go typically, right? And so your willingness to take the time to chat with me, to get to know me, to field my questions, even if they're silly, was just made all the difference. And I think Justin was just such a wizard at bridging conversational gaps, right? So for that project, Justin was managing a new psychology postdoc, Peter Samuelson, our homeboy, and I was the philosophy postdoc. And it took time to get everyone on the same page, to understand what people mean when they say what they say. And one of the stories I like to tell is that when it comes to interdisciplinary engagements, it feels very much like you're sitting down to play a game of chess. You got the pieces in front of you, you're bored, everything looks like you're good to go. But then the
Mhm.
person sitting across the board from you brings out a bag of dice. And it's really sort of unnerving, and you don't know what game they're playing. And are we playing the same game anymore? But I felt like Justin did such an amazing job sort of putting on different hats, right? And sort of, Dr. Samuelson would say one thing, and then Justin would step in and say, so Ian, you may have heard that such and such, but actually what Peter's saying is something else. And then I would say something, and Justin would say, well, Peter, you understand that what Ian's saying, is this, and he didn't mean to sound that way, whatever. And so it was such a great environment to build up that kind of interdisciplinary sort of chops. That's been really a huge part of my success in my career.
Yeah, yeah. Sounds like there was some translation needed back and forth between disciplines. Not that
Yeah.
you and Peter were problem children to each other, but
Yeah.
the discipline language being so different. What
Yeah.
are some of the other challenges that you faced as you've been moving throughout your career?
Yeah. I mean, so I guess one of the challenges has been to help other people see what I've seen, right? So I I got into higher education um, not wanting to have anything to do with psychology, right? And I wanted to be a philosopher, even though both my parents got their PhDs in psychology, and two of my grandparents got their PhDs in psychology. And some aunts and uncles got masters and PhDs in philosophy in psychology. I was going to be the black sheep of the family and study philosophy, right? But the Lord has a sense of humor. My very first job was working in this grad school of psychology, and I again, like I didn't initially want to have anything to do with psychology. I studied philosophy because I wanted to do something different, something more purely theoretical, right? And so I was genuinely annoyed by how much I loved how psychology could speak into philosophy and how philosophy could speak into psychology. It
Mhm.
truly bothered me, but I loved it. Right? I absolutely loved it. And so one of the challenges I've faced is to help other philosophers, other scholars to sort of taste and see just how good these kind of interactions can be, and how fruitful it can be to have interdisciplinary engagement like that. Because I think that kind of engagement where my philosophizing is paying attention to the empirical world makes my philosophy all the better. And I think it goes the other direction as well, where empirical research is best done when there's some sort of engagement with some of the theoretical undercurrents that are going to be a part of any sort of empirical investigation. And so there's this sort of back and forth conversation that's to be had that I'm just really, really enthusiastic about. It's been the cornerstone of my career. But it's not everyone has that experience, obviously. And so trying to get other people to sort of see where I'm coming from, why why I am as interested in psychology as I am as a philosopher.
What does that look like when you try to bring people along?
Well, it depends on the context, right? So in a place like Hillsdale, where they love their tradition, what I'll frequently do is just to say that I'm in good company because I'm on Aristotle's side, right?
Mhm.
And that's of course that carries a lot of weight at Hillsdale, but I'm being somewhat facetious, but the idea there is that the kind of integration that we're talking about, it permeates the Western philosophical tradition from the pre-Socratics, the Aristotle, through the Middle Ages, up through Descartes, Locke, Hume, and others. You start to see a close integration between theoretical questions and empirical questions, and it's only really in the sort of modern university that we see the siloing away of different disciplines where they're not meant to really talk to each other anymore. One of the cases I would make is just that the tradition is on my side. That doing philosophy in this kind of integrated way is how the Lord and/or Aristotle would have us do it.
I mean, it's not like you're taking the high road there or the
No,
mighty ground or whatever that might be.
right.
I love that that's just a real neutral, humble place that you're coming from.
That's right.
Yeah, yeah, okay. So when you think back to 2012, you started as a postdoc. Now you're associate professor at Hillsdale. What are some of the other things that have happened in between those points?
Yeah. So, so one of my big regrets has been not listening to my mother. And she told me just how good of a thing I had at Fuller. But at that point in my career, I had it in my head that if I'm going to be a philosopher on the philosophy job market, I really need to be amongst other philosophers, right? Need to be amongst my own kind. And there was another grant that I could be a liaison for, the philosophy and theology of intellectual humility project, and that was running at St. Louis University. And we knew going into this postdoc that was a possibility that something like that could come up, and that I could serve as a liaison between those two projects. And so that's what I did. But like I said, my mother tried to tell me how good I had it working with you and Justin, and I didn't realize how right she was until later on. So spent 2 years at St. Louis University working on that project, and then worked. That gave me sort of an appetite for writing grants. So I really loved this kind of world and how we could dream up projects and to answer problems that would be otherwise impossible to solve within sort of the standard tool set of higher education. So I felt like grant writing opened up a whole new world of innovation and ability to sort of solve problems that we might encounter at the discipline level and the departmental level, the college level, university level, whatever the case may be. I just really got hooked on grant writing. And so based off of those intellectual humility projects, I had this idea to write a grant for a big course that could be used by anyone anywhere in the world, sort of showcasing some of this research that had been done in the previous two grants. And so I collaborated with Duncan Pritchard, who was at the University of Edinburgh at the time. Edinburgh had been pioneering a lot of massive open online courses. So they were sort of one of the hubs for doing this kind of thing. And so the idea was for Duncan and I to write a grant together for an intellectual humility massive open online course. And so that's what we did, and moved to Edinburgh and moved back to Scotland with the family. And then shortly after that project got started, I was offered a position here at Hillsdale. And so I had to sort of finish up that project from abroad. We were able to hire someone else who could sort of help carry on some of the legwork on the ground there. But I had to sort of finish that project from afar while starting a new position at Hillsdale. That was a very intense couple years there for sure. And then, Justin and I kept talking about this idea for a project on experimental philosophy of religion. That was something we had talked about back when I was at Fuller, sort of pointing out that there's something to be done here. There's a grant to be written. There's gold in them there hills, so to speak. And so we did a pilot project. There was a small pilot project that we ran on the problem of evil, just to see what that would look like, to sort of test the waters for experimental philosophy of religion. And that went really well. And it pretty easily led to a major grant after that, which is the one we're working on right now, the Launching Experimental Philosophy of Religion project. And the goal now is to sort of bring all these different teams of researchers who have been in many ways working separate from each other, right? We have experimental philosophy, which is flourishing as a discipline on the one hand, but on the other hand, you have philosophy of religion, which has been flourishing over the last 50 some odd years, but there hasn't been very much integration between those two fields. And so what this project is trying to do is to bring those two things together and try to, again, launch this new area of research.
That is a lot of different steps and different cities and even different countries. So you've been back and forth between how many different cities since you started? Let's just go with since you started grad school.
Yeah. So after I submitted my dissertation, we moved back to Indiana for a little bit while I was looking on the job market. So it's from Scotland to Indiana, Indiana to LA, LA to St. Louis, St. Louis to Edinburgh, uh, Edinburgh to Hillsdale.
Okay, so
Yeah.
5 different cities or places, what it looked like for those who
Yeah.
couldn't see the counting out there in the sky.
That's right.
It's a lot of different hops and moves around, which is fairly common
Oh yeah.
in the life of an academic, being bounced around from postdoc and various positions and projects and things like that. It's been so fun for us to partner with you in so many different ways over the years. This has taken so many different forms and has looked a bunch of different ways, between the postdoc formal support to just being your colleagues at a distance to being able to partner together again with you on this particular larger grant that you have right now. I want to dig in a little bit behind the scenes of what it's looked like to have some professional partnership. Because one of the things that we don't often talk about in scholarly work and in higher ed is who all is behind the scenes helping things get pulled together. You maybe see the author listed on the publication or the paper, but you don't see all the moving parts. You see the project leader listed on the grant, but you don't see all the moving parts behind the scenes there. So if we could just step back for a little bit to help other people get a vision for what kind of professional partnership is possible for people doing similar work. So one of the things that I will often say is that we've got a rent your brain program. Being able to use a consultant is maybe another way to think about that. So being able to rent Justin's brain, being able to have some academic consultation in project development, some of the data analysis, different things that you've done there. What's it been like? What's been the impact for you of having professional consultation help from another academic?
Oh, it's been absolutely invaluable. And Justin is a master grant writer. He's got a great sense for what different funding bodies are going to be looking for, what they're going to be interested in. And so, getting to have the opportunity to bounce ideas off of you and Justin has been an absolute game changer for me. Because throughout all of that, right, throughout the applying for the grants in Edinburgh to the pilot project and so on and so forth, like you guys were there, and sort of going back to our very first interaction where you guys said, that we're investing in you as a person, not just you're not just a postdoc who's here and then gone. You guys meant it, right? So even though I was foolish enough to only be there for a year, you guys meant it, right? You really did invest in me, and it has been a huge part of my career. And I'm a philosopher, right? Despite my ancestry, my pedigree, I ended up studying philosophy, not psychology, and so I'm not trained in psychology. I'm really interested in it. I'm trying to build up some empirical chops myself, but I know full well, being intellectually humble, that I'm not an expert when it comes to empirical methods, data analysis, experiment design, so on and so forth. And so being able to rent Justin's brain, so to speak, has been a huge benefit when it comes to thinking about these projects, what kind of experiments to design, how to analyze the data that we've collected, and so on and so forth. Or even just sort of being able to use Justin as a hub for being connected to other people who can. If it's something that Justin himself can't help with, maybe he does know someone else who can help out with that thing. And so, sort of having you and Justin be sort of a port of call of friendship and collaboration has been, again, invaluable to everything I've done.
Yeah, it's just been so fun to partner with you along the way on all these different projects and different things that you've been doing. So, one of the ways that we have partnered with you and that you've had other professional partnerships is that rent a brain model, or the consultation, bringing in the expertise that you don't have through the various different disciplines. Another way that we've had the privilege of partnering with you is through academic coaching.
Yeah.
And coaching is one, I think, similar to what you're saying with you and Peter, or saying different, using the same words, meaning different things, and there needed to be translation. Coaching can mean a million different things, which can make it difficult. And I also as you have maybe alluded to before, say you have Aristotle on your side. When I describe coaching, I say that it really is coming from a bit of the history in the Socratic method, being able to use questions to drive forward instead of just here are the answers, but what are the questions that we should be asking? So, what has it looked like for you to be on the receiving end of some academic coaching, some project management and grant leadership coaching?
Yeah, no, that's great. And I really like this metaphor of the sort of the Socratic method idea, because I think that's exactly right. So say, we're sitting down and we're thinking about, what thinking about this, a workshop that's coming up or a conference, major conference. Well, what that often will look like is you and Justin will ask, so what do you want to accomplish with this conference, right? What do you want to do? And what are your goals and so on and so forth? And just sort of really sort of tease out and I'll give some sort of answer, but you keep pressing and wanting to see if that answer is really, do I mean that? How do you want to sort of, does that sort of, if is the conference that I'm having in mind, is that going to accomplish those goals? And, just trying to tease out, the vision for the project, the vision for the event, and making sure that those things are going to actually feed into each other in the right kind of way. And so I think that kind of interaction has been, it helps to use those kinds of that kind of feedback to ask questions that you might not have otherwise thought to ask. And so, when it comes to event planning, I think academics can be remarkably unimaginative, right? And a standard academic event can just be wall to wall talks with maybe some wine at the end of the day, right? And some food thrown in between. But with the coaching that I've received from you guys, I've been able to see a more dynamic way of thinking about human interaction and what kinds of events are going to best bring about the goals that we have for conferences or workshops, wherever the case may be. And frequently or rarely, if ever, are our goals best met by just having wall-to-wall talks, right? Because everyone's going to start tuning out. Everyone's going to be so tired. Maybe people by the end of the day aren't listening anymore. The quality of the interaction deteriorates pretty quickly. And so to have that kind of sort of dynamic way of thinking about asking dynamic questions that are being asked to help me think about the kinds of events that we want to have organized that are so central to these grants has been just a huge part of their success.
How do you imagine that some of the events, some of the things that you've put together that you were mentioning there, how might those have gone differently if you were not sitting through what sometimes is called death by 1,000 questions, but that process of coaching and drawing out? What do you think it would have been like if it was just, these are the ideas I have in my mind, I am the Velociraptor, I'm ready to go? What would that be like?
Yeah, so I think it'd be a lot more boring, first of all, and I think we wouldn't be as successful at achieving the goals that we're wanting to achieve with those conferences. So, for example, right, I think that one of the central goals of any in-person conference is the social interaction that comes from them. That's not common in higher ed, right, in my experience. Again, it's so common to have conferences be essentially wall-to-wall talks. And for someone who is aggressively introverted like I am, it's exhausting. It's exhausting to be sitting in these sort of uncomfortable chairs, hours on end. Some talks I may be more interested in than others. And just sort of, I start to lose the thread after a while. And by the time all the talks are done, I am aggressively interested in just going back to my room and not talking to anybody anymore. But when conferences go well, the amount of sort of talks that are sort of jammed in any particular day are diminished, and there's a lot more concern for social time in between, right? Having time to have a wine and cheese platter in between talks, and just getting able to riff with other people and to make connections and to find that you have friendships in other other disciplines, other fields, other universities, so on and so forth, because those kinds of friendships can be, absolutely pave the way to for future collaboration. And again, that's so commonly lost in the way most academic grants are organized. It's you don't have that same sort of space for social interaction and genuine friendship building. And so with that kind of coaching, that would all be lost.
Now, what is it that you think makes that mental divide between I need to just put on this academic conference that's the back to back to back to back, even though I know, not all, but a lot of the academics that I talk to are, as you just said, an aggressive introvert. And there's an exhaustion with that particular model of the back to back to back. And that is still so much of the predominant model, even for people who've experienced some
Yeah.
of these other kinds of events. What is it that you think pushes us forward as humans to continue to repeat that same thing that we know on one hand isn't getting us the result we really want,
Yeah.
and on the other is exhausting?
Yeah.
These
Well, I
are
think
really
that's
smart people that we're talking about. I mean, these are teams of academics
yeah.
who are thinking. You think for a living.
Yeah. I think so. I think it's a really complicated question. And certainly the answer is going to be complicated. I think part of it is um, maybe a lack of confidence, right? So sometimes people just feel like, well, this is what everyone else has done. This is my first time trying to organize a conference. I better just do exactly what they're doing too. And that's what everyone comes to expect. And so, even though we can see the reasons, even if we can see the reasons for doing something more innovative, um, there's sort of a lack of confidence and willingness to try to do something more exploratory when organizing a conference. But I think another part of it is, some of the incentives and funding issues that are permeating higher education, where if you're organizing a conference, you often want to have as many people there as you can, right, to be in the audience. But if they're going to be in the audience, they need to be presenting. Well, if you're going to have that many people all there to be in the audience and then also be presenting, unless you want to have people there for a couple of weeks, you're going to be be in a hard position to try to cram all that in, unless you just do wall-to-wall talks, right? So if given the current incentives that are at work in higher education, where you just typically don't go to conferences unless you're speaking at that conference, then I think there's an incentive to invite more people than you actually have time to invite, and just have a tremendous number of talks lined up. I think time is money, time is expensive, and rarely do people feel like they have the funding for their conferences, if there's any funding at all, to actually have social time, to have downtime where people can interact and again really build those friendships. And again, that's not because people don't see that those are valuable, but there's just not the funding, there's not the time available to do it. But if you are in a situation where there is more funding available, where you have research grants that are very generous in their support of whatever you're doing, then you have more room to do that, and to be more creative. And I think you have the ability to organize projects and conferences and events that are just end up being so much more beneficial and fruitful than the standard fare of academic conferences.
Yeah, it sounds like as you started that answer by saying it's complex, that I'm hearing in that answer, it's the professional pressure for one
Yeah,
to put something on that matches what the professional expectations might be.
yeah,
And then nestled in underneath all of that, the funding, the time availability, the insecurity on is this really going to help me accomplish the goal, and all those different parts. And that's where having some of those professional partnerships, then it sounds like, have been really critical and helpful, because
yeah.
it's not just you
That's
then
right.
on your own saying, this is how we're going to approach this particular topic, or this is how we're going to design this event, but you have a whole team, or you have other people with you helping you flesh out and think really critically about the goals and what it is you're trying to accomplish, so that then when you're being pushed to defend why you did something a certain way, you've got really well thought out
Yeah,
answers because that came through the design process. That makes
that's
a
right.
lot of sense.
Well, and I think part of this is just the appreciation that people have different gifts and different specializations, different skill sets. And you will be surprised to learn that philosophers are rarely asked to sort of plan weddings, say. I can only imagine the sort of a wedding that would be planned by a philosopher. It could be any number of hilarious situations, but academic philosophers are not going to have that. Being an event planner may not be in their skill set, and they may not be aware of what kind of questions they should even be asking to put forward a good event. So, like, even thinking about like what is the goal of the conference, that can, like, some people may never think that question. They may not ever consider that. They might just say, well, no, like I said I would be doing a conference, so I'm doing a conference. There's not really any goal beyond this is what I said I would do, and I've got to do it. Right.
Right.
And so having someone who has more experience and a different skill set to shed light on, what actually needs to happen in these kinds of events is a game changer.
Just like that game you mentioned earlier, are we playing chess and why are there dice out?
Yeah,
I
that's right.
imagine that there might be some things that have come up through professional partnership that have made things maybe more difficult for you, or have thrown a wrench in things, perhaps caused a need for professional support in the form of therapy
Yeah,
for
that's right.
the, some of the activities perhaps that we've forced people to go through or highly encourage them to go through. Can you think of, just to add one brief humorous moment, and can you think of any stories where moving through this slightly different method has caused a wrinkle, made you want to pull your hair out, or driven you to some other point of frustration or despair?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes there would be times where as someone who is very very introverted, where I felt like I was needing to share more than I otherwise normally would share, and talk more than I otherwise would talk, and try to sort of overcome my own social anxiety to accomplish goals in the coaching that I wouldn't naturally do on my own. That's sort of one thing that sort of comes to mind immediately.
Yeah, I've definitely had many an academic introvert say to me, "It's so exhausting,
Oh yeah,
to do these events and activities in this different way. It's just so draining."
yeah,
And as a aggressive extrovert, maybe to use the opposite of your aggressive introvert, I just find all of those different thoughts so fascinating on how we respond to the same experiences, but so differently depending on how we're wired. And
yeah,
that's such an important piece to keep in mind then when creating some of these events to fill the goals. It doesn't serve anybody if everybody is exhausted. And
yeah.
so, how can we build momentum and energy instead of drain momentum and energy?
Right.
But as we think about wrapping up this conversation on some of the successes that you've had and been able to accomplish, can you give us a little bit of a teaser? What might be next for you? Where are you going from here as you wrap up this grant that you are closing out?
Yeah, I mean, at this point right now, as I've seen my hair gray at seemingly an increasing rate over the past year, I'm starting to think maybe I want to take a year to just focus on my classes, but I'm already starting to think about the next projects.
Mm-hmm.
Like I love doing this stuff. I can't get away from it. And so I've got a couple different grant ideas that I've started working on. Grants on trying to diagnose threats to democracy, grants on spiritual yearning, trying to understand the virtues and vices associated with spiritual yearning. and then some other projects on looking at sort of the philosophy of anthropology and things like that. So I've got a couple different grants that I'm working on that are in my back pocket, so to speak. And so I'm sure I'll be emailing you about those things in the future.
Well, I look forward to receiving that email. I look forward to dreaming and planning with you for what the next exciting adventure might be. But thank you for taking the time out today to share a little bit about the stories of your success behind the scenes, what it's been like on the anxiety side of the conversation, where you're keeping it cool above ground, but maybe
Sure.
secretly trembling underneath.
Sure.
Thank you for sharing some of those challenges with us, some of the big wins, and some of the challenges that you've navigated in your career so far.
Well, it's been an honor to be here. Thank you so much for having me, Rebecca.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And thank you so much to everyone for listening to Stories of Your Success Behind the Scenes with Blueprint 1543.